In a previous video, I briefly touched on the subject of battling nature with a sleeping bag system and a bivy bag, and I'll try and explain the problems that I've had in the past. Let me get this pack off here. I personally have had occasion where my sleeping bag, I know, is fit for purpose, and it was lovely and warm most of the night. But when I fell asleep and woke up, I think it was about 5:30 in the morning, it was bitter. I was actually shivering inside my sleeping bag, and that was using a gore-tex cover over, which we call bivy bags. Why would such a good sleeping bag fail me at that very early hour in the morning, about 5 o'clock in the morning, 5:30? It is because I was battling nature. We've all heard of wind chill. We know the temperature is going to say be -3, but you get a cold wind onto that -3, it's pushing it -4, 5, 6, depending on the strength of the wind. It's getting colder and colder, and here's what's happening. A sleeping bag will have a dissipation rate. The dissipation is generally 8 to 12 hours. A dissipation is my body heat that I've generated by either walking, eating, having a hot drink before getting into the bag. I then warm that space of the sleeping bag. It's a sleeping bag's job to retain as much of my body heat for a certain amount of hours, whether that be 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 hours. Different sleeping bags claim a different dissipation in hours. Mine barely made it, I think, 8, 9 hours. It was pretty good because I went to bed early, which is another thing. You want to go to bed as late as you can and wake up as early as you can. But I went to bed early because it was dark early. And of course, I was about a good 3-4 hours missing off that dissipation. But still, I wanted a trick where I could increase the dissipation of my sleeping bag. And that's what I'm going to show you here. I had to explain the problem before I can show the solution. This is one of my sleeping bags. It's a buffalo. It's 2 parts. It's 𝒃𝒚 shell, and the inner is an aquatherm fleece. Because I'm a cold sleeper, I'll either use fleece or I'll use down, which are feathered. So it's either going to be fleece or feathers for a cold sleeper. And that is the sleeping bag. Let's dig out a bivy bag. But if you are a bivy camper, a bivy bag and a sleeping bag is probably a great way to go, because you can lose the tent and the basher. I need something in my pack which is going to go between the bivy bag and the sleeping bag. Just something to increase the dissipation rate. I'm not trying to make the system warmer. I'm trying to get more hours dissipation. So I'm going to put this bivy bag out and get my sleeping bag into it, and I'll show you 2 methods of extending the dissipation, which in turn will keep it warmer for longer. I'm not going to put my insulating pad down because I'm not out for the night. I'm only demonstrating a point or showing you a technique or a tip. Okay, let's get my sleeping bag. Get this over to the bivy. And show 2 options. I'll show you the second option if you haven't got one of these. A grabber blanket. It's not one of them blankets that you get in a first aid pack. You know, this has been with me a long time. Different colours. I always have some kind of rescue colour even in the bug out bag. If I do need rescuing, I don't want everything to be camo. Nobody's gonna see me when I do need rescue with a camo, but on this side here, it is a reflective here. This reflective is said to be as warm as a wool blanket when used properly. And yeah, it does seem to be quite good, but I don't know about as warm as a wool blanket. But all I want is a layer between the bivvy bag and the actual sleeping bag, and that can be achieved by draping this over the sleeping bag but inside the bivvy bag. That's option number one. We'll come back to this in a second. Option number two is what I have already. This is a nylon bivvy bag that goes over my sleeping bag. I already have a 𝒃𝒚 shell, which is windproof, and that is the Aquatherm fleece. There is no batting between the insulation. I'm relying on this Aquatherm here. But let's open up the bivvy, and on the inside is a reflective bivvy bag. Now when I put this inside the actual gore-tex bivvy, I have a layer that is going to increase the range of the dissipation. Now there's no need actually to ever separate this unit again once it's in. I tend to travel it like this. I am in the process of still testing this nylon, and I know what you're thinking, the nylon and that will make it sweaty, but I am a cold sleeper, and even if it does sweat, and even if the inside does get wet, it is designed to be warm when wet. I would rather be warm and wet than cold and dry, but you might have other ideas. I don't know what brand this centre zip nylon reflective bivvy bag is. I got it on a car boot sale, a tabletop sale, but these are always available online. It's by a company called Grabber, has little grommets, and that would go between my sleeping bag and inside the bivvy bag, and that would radiate not only the heat back, but it also increases the dissipation, maybe getting it from that 8 hours to 12 hours on them long winter nights. I'm not going to get all the way into this sleeping bag because I have clothing on, makes it a little trickier, but now I grab the space blanket. Now again, this isn't the kind of blankets you get in a first aid pack, which are Mylar. I'm just going to put it between the sleeping bag and the bivvy bag. What I've done there is create a little more dissipation. It's quite loose as well over me. Probably best done in a slightly bigger bivvy bag, if I'm honest, but I'm a bigger guy. So reflecting the heat doesn't actually make the system very much warmer, but it increases the amount of hours that I'm going to be in here. In the winter, those 8 hours could extend to more than 12 hours if it's going dark at 4 in the afternoon in the winter. And I might find myself getting into my sleeping bag a lot earlier, even 9 o'clock at night. So now I've got 9 o'clock at night right through till 6 in the morning. I have way extended the dissipation rate of even a really good sleeping bag. Adding this increases the dissipation rate in hours. And remember, if you are one who are thinking you're going to be too hot and sweating that, I'm under no legal obligation to actually have it over my sleeping bag. I can just push it down to the bottom where my feet are, and then when I'm ready to sleep, say midnight, I reach down. Now I bring it up and over my sleeping bag. Now from midnight, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just 6 hours dissipation in the coldest of climates. This is already lovely and warm. And this is how I keep the dissipation rate of any sleeping bag going from 8 hours easily to 12 hours. But I am going to test this nylon bivvy because it's lighter. Straight into the pack. I'm not using that compression bag, so I have a pad. Instead of having a head shelter such as a basher or a tarp or a tent, I don't need any of them. I could just rely on what you've just seen there. Although with this pack it is easier to carry the sleeping bag behind my head and then set it up as a system. But if I want to move it a little more quickly, then I wouldn't do that. I'd just put everything in here. Clothing on top. This has an extendable hood. Put that over so I have quick access to a warm jacket. That's my mountain pack. It's not for bushcraft and it's not a wilderness survival. It's not a bug out bag. It is for a few days on the windiest of mountains where I don't want to put a tent up, you know, but I want warm clothing. This pack is for my own recreational purposes. And if I want to head up into the hills, it's kind of pointless bringing a tent because where I live is all uphill or downhill. It never seems to level out. There's where a bivvy bag comes into play there. So in lieu of having a tarp or a basher, I kind of have a poncho. Now I have the Dutch Army poncho, which can be put up in a half pyramid. So if it's been raining, I take it off. It goes up on a trekking pole and I have a head shelter and I can cook under it as well. I've got my back to the wind, and then all I have is what you've seen here is a bivvy bag, a decent sleeping bag and a reflective. I'm going to think that the silver reflective called the Grabber Space Blanket is going to work a lot better. If I think there's a chance of rain, I could leave the maroon coloured reflective bivvy at home and bring the Grabber Space Blanket and the Gore-Tex bivvy and marry it up that way. And if I don't want a head shelter of any kind, of course you can turn bivvy bags upside down so that the back of the hood becomes a face shield. You can also use your jacket to put over the face port as well, and there's multiple techniques. You don't have to be wet and miserable. I already have a cook set in here and things like that. Without the bivvy bag, I was feeling the chill in the Buffalo at about +6°C. Once I added the Gore-Tex, it did very little to increase any warmth at all. I know some people claim they do. They don't, because you do have that cold on the outside of your Gore-Tex. There is nothing that is going to make Gore-Tex warmer. You can just block the cold from getting in quicker. That's all you can do, and that's your dissipation. Until next time, take care of yourself, and I'll see you out there. Happy trails.